So, as far as the Istanbul talks are concerned, they're part of a technical meeting that was supposed to be held in Istanbul after the agreement in Qatar, where both countries decided to go for a temporary ceasefire and then continue the technical level discussions on how the peacefire would be prolonged, as well as to create a mechanism joined consensually in which Kabul and Islamabad both feel that their security priorities are intact and they remain unhinged because of whatever happened in the past. Now, what we've known so far is through unofficial channels mostly, and some of it officials through sources as well, that these negotiations they haven't gone down well. And we've seen the blame coming in from both countries. The Afghans blaming Pakistan and the Pakistanis blaming the Afghans for the failure of the negotiations. But from Pakistan's perspective, because it's on the receiving end of these terrorist attacks, it's a long drawn conclusion has been, and there have been multiple statements that some of these FTOs under the UN umbrella, which are the foreign terrorist organizations, are actually using the ground in Afghanistan to carry out attacks, to plan attacks, execute them, and provide also logistical support to them for any sort of attacks that falls under the umbrella of the Pakistani Taliban as well as Baloch separatist militant groups in Balochistan. So it's not just about the Taliban, it's also about other groups that have a more secular makeup in terms of its ideology and have separatist, tones to their kinetics. And so that's why it's been a concern consistently. Now, in terms of trust, I think that the trust was not there to start with. And that's why you had a major escalation on the border, which has resulted in terms of the peace talks. And these peace talks, because both these countries ultimately realized, and Pakistan in particular, that it wasn't working, and the airstrikes into Afghanistan, which has caused the border escalation, was basically for the reason because it shows the frustration of Pakistan that they've tried to talk to them individually or bilaterally, but it hasn't worked, and so it's pulled in two other actors, which is Qatar and Turkey. So the first part was in Qatar, and the second part is in Turkey, and we haven't seen these discussions. So when you look at what has been said so far, literally everything has been agreed upon apart from the important part where Pakistan is asking the Taliban for a bilateral agreement with a quadrilateral mechanism for monitoring, in which the Afghan Taliban would have to take action against these groups which are anti-Pakistan and targeted security forces. Now, the mechanism on which this is built is actually something that the Turks and other countries that were involved in the protracted conflict in Syria actually used, and it actually has an informational sharing mechanism, while also simultaneously it involves, blame for where and from where these attacks have been taking place, also from which groups these attacks are actually coming out from. And so what they will do is that they'll provide specific kinetic intelligence in terms of how things are. And then that country from where these attacks are staged are responsible to take action. So it brings the onus back onto the Afghan Taliban. And as I've said, Pakistan is at the receiving end. And so they don't want to sign it. And what our Pakistani officials are saying is that the Taliban agreed to everything at the negotiating table. But the delegation, as soon as it has started talking to its central government in Kabul and Kandahar, they have refused to sign any document. And so that's why we see that these talks have been stalled. And from what information is being received up till now, it's the arbiters that are trying to come up with some kind of joint mechanism which would actually pave way for further talks and strengthen the ceasefire. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. I think that one of the things that we need to consider is that when they actually were ready to talk about all these demands was the delegation. But the delegation is not empowered to make those kind of statements because the makeup in which the Afghan Taliban's ideological, tower is, it could actually cascade in different ways if some of these decisions are put into action. What I technically mean to say is that some of these actions that the international community and Pakistan are asking for the Taliban to take will actually create a problem for the Taliban internally as well, because the groups that they are asking to for the Taliban to take action against are what makes the Taliban. And for them, it is a bigger problem also because they don't only have, terrorists that are from Pakistan. They also have terrorists from different countries. So they have people from Tajikistan, from China, from Russia, from Uzbekistan, from the Arab world, and now even Bangladesh and maybe even India. So all of these groups, non-state actors present in Afghanistan, actually make up the entire Taliban network. So for them to take action against them and by signing a binding agreement with Pakistan, tomorrow other countries from the nearby, borders will also come in to say that you have these people along with you. If you could sign a deal with Pakistan, now sign one with us as well. So they look at it from that perspective as well, that it opens up this entire, gateway of demands coming in from different countries. Secondly, in terms of their territory, one of the recommendations from Pakistan has been is that you either take action yourself, and if you think that you do not have the capacity, then we will take action, or either come up with a joint mechanism through which we take action. So all three demands have been rejected by the Taliban. So I don't see that even if they accepted it to discuss, I did not see this coming that there would be a signed document in which they would be in agreement against all these groups, because technically they all combine to make the Taliban. In its formative phase, I think it's more of an ideological question rather than anything else. If they did not give away Osama bin Laden, who came from a third country and was not even ethnically Pashtun, I don't see how they would do that against the TTP, which number one is framed from an Islamic perspective as that, and secondly from the lineage perspective of both tribes being from Afghanistan, and then lastly also from the narrative of the Taliban itself that it is creating an Emirates. The entire concept of Emirates is basically, it revolves around bringing in different elements and fragments from different parts of the world and creating this place where they take this idea of an Islamic governance system and actually try to go and, carry it out or create another state of a sort of an Islamic emirate in that part. And this Emirates in Afghanistan becomes a modular state which is being copied in different parts of the world. So if they start taking action against anyone that's coming over there, that concept of the Emirates will no longer be there. And then secondly, we've been seeing that this since 2021, since the Taliban came in, although this entire framing of ideology is based around Islam, it's come and the movement itself, the Taliban movement itself has actually come and become more and more nationalistic. And so it is the same kind of trend that you see of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, in Syria, and different other groups within the North African and West African domains, as well as what the Taliban have actually now trying to realize is that the idea of a sort of a nationalism mixed with Islam and tribalism, is the way forward for them. So some of these problems are not even like Taliban's problems; these are problems that have existed for centuries now. But the Taliban have been the one who have the most, atrociously actually followed the agenda of achieving those problems or resolving those problems or creating leverage on those problems which have existed for centuries. No other government has managed to do so. So it's a struggle on different points as I see it, but it's also problematic in many different ways. So any expectation from the international community to judge a gray area operation such as the Taliban, which is basically an unrecognized entity on the map of a governance of the world, to expect something on global democratic humanitarian values that actually is based on mutual respect, I think that is a fallacy to begin with. So there is no expectation. What Pakistan is trying to do is actually to exhaust all options to create that element of doubt within the international community that this governance system of the Taliban is actually not correct. And then it actually creates that room for any further kinetic action as well. So I don't see this working out the way that the expectations around it revolve. Bilateral diplomacy between Pakistan and Afghanistan had failed, and I think that's why it resulted on border escalation, as I mentioned even previously. But what we do see is that Turkey and Qatar, although we haven't seen Turkey and Qatar along, working together, the history of that does not exist. But what we do see is that Turkey actually coming to talk to Pakistan, and Qatar being traditionally the abode of the Taliban, where its office has existed and has been central to their movement globally, as well as signing the Doha Agreement. And what I know is that even before the agreement was being signed, both these countries, Qatar and Doha, actually talked to each other, and Turkey was talking to Pakistan, and Qatar was talking to the Taliban. And even while during the negotiations of the first round, it was both these countries talking to these countries individually and then talking to each other. And then in later part, it brought both these countries together to actually talk about it. Turkey's role, obviously, it's trying to see itself as a stabilizer, not just in the Middle East, but in the larger MENA region as well. Whereas the Southeast Asian politics, we've seen Turkey's role previously in the escalation between Pakistan and India as well, and now we do see it in the Pak-Afghanistan relationships as well. So Turkey is trying to create that image of a country that is responsible for peace in different ways. And so it won't just be Pakistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, but Pakistan will heavily rely on Turkey's backing in the Middle East as well. Qatar, on the other hand, obviously has been one of those states that has supported the Taliban in different ways in bringing together the Doha peace deal. And even after that, Qatar has a history with Hamas as well. And so it tries to play the negotiating table in terms of not just hosting these countries, but providing that kind of, outreach to the rest of the world where some of these entities are not recognized or they would not have that kind of diplomatic outreach. So stabilizing the Middle East as well as Southeast Asia at this time seems to be a priority because there's problem everywhere else. Also, in terms of both these countries, they don't only see this problem as Pakistan and Afghanistan. They also see it as something much bigger, which could actually lead to a sort of a catalyst regionally, and that could have a domino effect on different governments as well. And that's why they thought that it is important to intervene and sort of stop this. How successful they will be, I'm skeptic about that. But I think that the only good thing that would actually come out of this negotiation process far ahead would be that they decide to continue negotiations. I don't see any concrete results coming out of it. I think that India is a spoiler basically in all of this, and it would be a great mistake by the Afghan government to actually move towards India. I see that more of a reaction against Pakistan than actually the love for India itself. Muttaqi's symbolic statements and gestures and how his entire visit was portrayed in India has great value for antagonism against Pakistan. And particularly, even when he's left India, we've seen the Indian press and some of the people that he spoke to make controversial statements that he might have made to them privately as well. Even yesterday, there was a publication from India in which it was quoting Muttaqi saying that Jammu and Kashmir is actually part of India. And then the entire water conservation part and where India is actually trying to invest to build dam on river Kabul, as well as other factors included. Pakistan genuinely has started to believe that Afghanistan will be one of those instigators that will draw its military, into its eastern part, where into the western border, whereas the eastern part with India is already under fire, and they do expect that there would be any sort of fight or escalation in the near future as well. And so this anxiety within Islamabad that this visit has created actually has some substantial grounds as well, is because we do see that this simultaneously the optics behind both of them is to actually create that anxiety within Pakistan and to draw itself into two borders. And if you look at it historically as well, some of these statements from the Indian NSA as well as other think tanks that are BJP related, it hasn't been so well. And it's difficult in terms of more conventional warfare for any country to win. In the recent past, we've seen the more protracted conflicts such as Ukraine and Russia. There hasn't been any solution between Palestine and Israel. We've seen that they ultimately had to sit down and negotiate, or Iran and Israel for that. And Pakistan and India as well. So wars cannot be won the way that they were traditionally, and wars are no longer fought by militaries as well on ground where you actually enter into someone else's terrain and you try to conquer it. Wars have become more hybrid, they have become more unconventional, and they have become what we call asymmetric. So India's leverage on the Taliban, where the TTP is already viewed by the Pakistani establishment as a proxy network that the Taliban have been using with other countries as well pulling in. With India's, advent into this entire prism once again, particularly with the Taliban, those fears have risen multiple fold, and it is genuinely believed that it will be a distractor for Pakistan's not just economy, but also in terms of the turf of conflict that we see brewing in the near future. I don't have many hopes from the talks right now. The only good thing that would actually come out of the talks is that both countries decide to keep talking. But Pakistan's policy has been very, very clear, and I think that the Minister for Defense, the day that the talks began, he had actually given out Pakistan's official stance that if the Taliban do not agree, Pakistan will continue to do what it did, which means that for every attack that takes place inside Pakistan and is traced back to Afghanistan, Pakistan will retaliate. Simultaneously, Kabul had been calm in many ways to react to that. There were more explanations of Khwaja Asif's statements rather than reactions. But today, when the talks have nearly ended, and from what we're hearing is that almost on the verge of collapse without any headway ahead, we've seen actually Kabul giving out official statements that for every attack that will take place in Afghanistan, it will be avenged in Islamabad, which is a direct threat to Pakistan's capital as well as its national security as well. So I think the way that these talks are structured and how these both governments are, head-on collision with each other, I don't see any positivity coming out of it, apart from the fact that if we see China and the US sort of intervene and try to create some kind of, barrier between both of them or impede this conflict with tangible goals, will then not only settle. Otherwise, I don't see it going on. I see more conflict on the borders.